Chapter Spooks.
G'day, and welcome to Chapter Spooks, where we talk about the books that keep your kids up at night. And today we're looking at number 20 in the Bone Chillers series. It's crazy, we are really getting to the pointy end of this one. And today we're looking at the book Scare by Gene Holt. Now, we saw Gene Holt earlier with The Queen of the Gargoyles, and so right off the bat I'm going to tell you, this is better than that. This is definitely redeeming him in my eyes, which is pretty good because I didn't even think he was a bad writer. I just thought that he made a mistake by making the end of that book much less scary than the start of the book. And it is a bit reductive to say this, but I feel like this book does the exact opposite. It starts off with that sort of very kid-friendly, fun idea, and then makes it turn darker. And if you're going to write a story, that's the way you want to do it. Start with the fun, and then make it turn creepy, because, hey, creepy is fun for people who like horror books. But to explain why I thought it was so much fun, I should first explain I was a bit blindsided by this book. Because when I saw that it was called Scare, and it's all about a teddy bear, I assumed that it was one of those... I've always called them the vengeful forget-me-not. It's this trope of something that someone leaves behind, and either because it was brought to life by some magic, or because their love brought it to life or whatever, it then, being abandoned, wants to get back at the person who forgot about it, you know? And technically, this book does do those things. But because it wasn't doing it in the way that I was expecting, it still felt fresh in my mind, because I was actually looking back on this. I thought that the quote-unquote vengeful forget-me-not was much more common. I remember seeing it all over the place, but when I actually looked into it, did a little bit of research to see if I could find examples, the only example I could find was an episode of Round the Twist, an Australian TV show based around the works of Paul Jennings. But I looked back and realized that I was actually thinking about, Night of the Living Dummy, which isn't actually a forgotten toy, it's just an evil living toy. And then I was thinking about Child's Play, which again is an evil toy, not a forgotten toy. And then I was thinking about different references that people make about it in jokes and media, like, oh, evil, creepy doll. And I realized that this actually isn't that common. It's just that all of the pieces are already there of the idea of corrupted innocence, the idea of living toys. I mean, who hasn't seen Toy Story? The idea of some sealed evil in a can, to use the trope. The idea of something that's been left behind or locked away, and so it becomes even more potent, like it's fermenting in its own evil until it finally comes back. All of these ideas are there, but there actually aren't that many examples of this trope. So, hey, if it sounds interesting to you, why don't you give it a go? Because I would love to read more stuff like this, especially if it's as good as Scare was. But to explain how good it was, we'll have to get into it. So, this is Bone Chillers number 20, Scare. Our story begins with us being introduced to Timothy Bender. He had his 12th birthday party a few weeks ago, and so he heads into the lounge room to tell his mum that he's made a decision. From now on, he doesn't want to be called Timmy. That's such a childish name. He's 12 now. He wants to be called Tim. And there's a fun bit where he's watching TV with his mum, and I thought that they were doing a bit of a subversion because they're watching an old rom-com on the TV, and Tim says, hey, can we change the channel? And his mum says, no, I'm watching this. Also, don't you want to learn more about girls, seeing as how you're more mature? I thought they were going to do an undercut, but it turns out that Tim actually does want to know more about girls, because there's a particular girl at school that he has a crush on called Jane Wiley. He doesn't use that language though. It says that whenever he sees her, his mouth seems to dry up, and he feels very nervous. And since Tim is just complaining about the movie on TV, his mum says, hey, I got an idea. How about you clean out all the old toys and junk and stuff from your room? I mean, if you're so mature now, Tim, how about we get rid of some of that old stuff and have a fresh start? And Tim likes the idea, but he very quickly realizes, is this just a trick to get me to clean my room? And his mum says, yeah. I like that. It's a fun little character moment. And it's firmly established our character. He wants to be seen as more mature, he's got a thing for girls, and he now is cleaning out his room of all his old toys. So when he goes to his room, there's some interesting descriptions of the things coming out of his closet, some torn comic books, even some leftover garbage that's rotting away, and a handheld video game console that doesn't work. But of course, the most important thing is a teddy bear, which is falling apart. It's got, it tears around its neck. Even the little glass eyes it has, one of them is cracked. And this is apparently a teddy bear called Baby Curly. hovering it over the bin, Tim is hesitating because he remembers loving this thing when he was a little kid. In fact, that's why it's so torn up, is that he took it with him everywhere. But even he has to admit to himself that he doesn't play with it anymore, so he throws it in the bin. But we're setting up our threat early, because when he does, Timmy can swear he hears a little voice in his head saying, "No, Timmy, not me." But Tim decides to ignore it, so he bundles up all of the garbage and he throws it out. But that night, there's a thunderstorm, because of course there's a thunderstorm, and he hears a loud crash of thunder outside of his window. Tim goes running to the window and he sees that there's something on the ground. It looks like a wet, injured animal, and he sees that the bin has tipped over. He's worried that maybe it's a squirrel, a raccoon, maybe even a neighborhood cat, so he goes running downstairs. He grabs a cardboard box, he empties out some of the stuff that's in it from the garage, he grabs the cardboard box, runs outside, and it's pelting down with rain, so he just scoops it into the box and runs inside. He then lays down a towel and he tips the box out so that the little animal can fall out, but instead of an animal, it's his teddy bear, drenched with rain. He feels a bit silly to have gone to all this effort just to save an old ratty toy, but something in his stomach just doesn't feel right. So he ends up cleaning up the toy, patting it down with the towel, and then he sits it up on the top shelf of his desk, and that makes him feel a little better, and then he goes back to sleep. The next day at school, we get that classic scene, where you got the two teams picking for their baseball team, and our kid is sitting there going, "Oh, come on, I'm not that bad at the sport." And it's true, Tim is not that bad at baseball, but he's just not popular at all. In fact, he doesn't have any friends. He used to have a best friend called Ross, but for some reason, when 6th grade started, Ross started hanging out with a bunch of other kids who were very mean, and he stopped hanging out with Tim and started, in fact, bullying him. And for reasons Tim cannot understand, his crush, Jane Wiley, has been hanging out with him. It's almost like their boyfriend-girlfriend. And because Ross is one of the ones picking the teams, of course he's never going to pick his old friend Tim. Although I want to add as a side note, the other team captain is a girl, and I have a sneaking suspicion that whilst our kid is a little bit self-deprecating here, the real reason he's not being picked for that team is because all the girls pick all their friends to be on their team, so she doesn't know him, and that's why she's not picking him. I think that's interesting. It adds a little bit to the dynamic that he assumes that he's just unpopular, everyone hates him, when really it's just that he's not in that clique. But he does eventually get picked for the team with all of the girls, and so they're playing baseball, and he actually does pretty good. He gets 2 bases on his first, hit with the bat, but then the next person gets out, so he's now in the field. And the reason this matters is because he's watching them for a bit, but he's distracted, especially when he sees a puddle in the field from the night before, and he starts thinking about what happened the other night with the teddy bear. And because he's not paying attention, someone yells out to him, and he looks up just in time to get beamed in the head by a baseball, which has of course been thrown by Ross. So Ross starts making fun of him, saying, "Oh man, this space cadet wasn't even paying attention, what a loser." The teacher tries to stop him, but even though he helps Tim up and sends him off to the nurse, the other kids are already laughing at him, making fun because of what Ross said. The only thing he can say in response is, "My name is Tim," but there's not much of a comeback, and nobody seems to pay any attention. And of course, Tim doesn't feel that mature, seeing as how he got hit in the head and everyone's laughing at him. He feels like he just wants to run home and cry. That afternoon after school, he's in his room putting together one of his model kits. He actually has a collection of horror movie monsters that you put together yourself and paint. It's actually a kind of a cool idea. But it also shows that he is very lonely, because not only does he do this because he can't go out and hang out with friends, but as he's painting, he's thinking about what happened at school today. He just feels terrible. It's almost like when 6th grade started, everyone was told how it would work, but he was left out. He didn't get that manual, so he feels like there are rules that he just doesn't understand. I don't know if this is meant to be a reference to maybe him having some sort of a mental issue like anxiety, maybe even something on the spectrum, but I don't think so. I think it's just an example of a poor kid who's not popular and he feels like he's left out of everything. He thinks about asking his dad for advice, but that just makes him feel worse, because the idea of going to his dad and saying, "Hey Dad, I don't have any friends, I'm the biggest loser in school," that's just going to make him feel worse. He does like the idea of talking to his mum, and so he does head to the kitchen, but she's cooking dinner and she's currently on the phone to her sister. And I like they throw in a little bit of dialogue, her saying, "Oh man, you cannot believe what Marla's doing to ruin her life now," because she's basically gossiping to her sister about their other sister. I like this. It feels like a very human moment, and even though we don't get into the weeds of it, I've seen this kind of thing happen. But it does mean that Tim has no one to turn to. So he goes back up to his room, but when he goes and sits on his bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the glue to dry, having nothing else to do, he hears that little voice again, saying, "I can make Jane your girlfriend." Tim doesn't know where this voice is coming from, so like before, he ignores it, but this time he doesn't think he's going crazy, he just doesn't understand. He wants to understand it more, but before he can even start looking for where this voice is coming from, his parents call him down to dinner. Now, I like this. This is a subtle but effective moment, because technically, now that he's down in dinner, he could say to his mum, "Hey, can I talk to you?" Like, he doesn't need to do it at the table when his dad's there. He could still ask her for advice, but he's still thinking about that little voice. And so, after he finishes his dinner, he goes straight back up to his room, because not only does he want to know where that voice is coming from, but that promise, "I can make Jane your girlfriend," that's what he wants more than anything else. Hey, maybe he is crazy, but what if he's not? So after dinner, he heads straight back up to his room. Tim stood in the middle of his room and turned slowly, looking around. "Where are you?" he demanded. Silence. Tim put his hands on his hips, glaring at the wall over his bed. "Show yourself," he ordered. Then he quickly peered around, seeking any sign of a response. Nothing. Tim flopped down on his bed, giving up. I must have imagined the whole thing, he decided. What was I thinking? That some magical voice was going to show up and help me get Jane? I must be crazy if I thought anyone could ever help me do that. It's hopeless. Just then, the strange, staticky sound seeped into his head, as though somebody had suddenly disconnected the cable from a TV. Tim sat up on the edge of his bed. "It's back!" he thought excitedly. His heart started to thump in his chest. Then faintly, the little baby voice faded in.
"Have you decided to believe me?"
"Can you help me?" Tim asked, glancing around the room. "To get Jane?"
"I can help you, if you believe in me."
"What's to believe?" Tim replied. "I can hear you. If I'm not crazy, then you're real, right?"
"Good,"
the eerie little voice answered.
"You're not crazy. I'm real. I'll help you with Jane, if that's what you want. All I've ever wanted is to make you happy."
Tim slid to his feet and turned slowly, looking around his room. "Can I see you?" he asked. "Or are you just in my head?" The voice giggled a little.
"Tee! Oh, you can see me,"
the voice said.
"I'm right here in your room."
"Where?" Tim demanded, turning around. "I don't see anything. Show me."
"You'll have to find me yourself,"
the voice told him.
"I'll give hints. Right now, you're only lukewarm."
"Lukewarm?" Tim asked. "Oh, I get it." He took a step toward the closet.
"Getting colder,"
the voice peeped. Tim switched directions and took a few steps toward the door to his room.
"Warmer, colder, colder,"
the voice responded, following his steps.
"Now you're freezing,"
it chirped with a chuckle. Tim groaned and started to walk toward his models.
"Warmer, warmer, and now you're cold again,"
the voice told him when he had passed the middle of the room. Tim stopped. He looked around thoughtfully for a moment, and then took a single step toward his desk.
"Ah,"
the voice said approvingly.
"warmer."
Tim took another step closer to his desk.
"Much warmer."
He took another step.
"Much, much warmer."
Tim put his hand flat on the top of his desk.
"Hot,"
the voice squealed. Tim began to rummage through the piles of papers on his desk. He opened the top drawer and peered inside.
"You're cooling off rapidly,"
the voice warned him. Shutting the drawer, Tim again scanned the top of his desk for a sign of anything that might be speaking to him. "There's nothing here," he said in frustration. "I give up."
"Don't quit so fast,"
the voice scolded.
"That's one of your problems. You quit too easily. Life's not easy, but I promise you that reward follows effort. And besides, you were on the right track. You're still hot."
Tim looked over the desk for a few moments, but he still didn't see anything there. Finally, he looked up at the bookshelf high above his desk.
"Scalding,"
said the babyish voice.
"You're burning up."
Tim slowly peered at his bookshelf. There were a few dusty books, a globe, and then...
"You're on fire,"
the voice exclaimed happily. Tim found himself face to face with his old teddy bear.
"Bingo,"
said baby Curly. Hell to the yes. If you're going to be playing around with little toys, the whole idea of evil and corrupted innocence, you got to throw in that little bit of cheeky, fun, childish games in there. It really suits this book. And I like that it's not actually cruel at this point. Like, some of the hints at making someone your girlfriend might be a little creepy, but ultimately it's starting off soft and subtle. But now that Tim has identified that he's actually talking to his teddy bear, he wants to know how this is happening, why it's happening. But the only explanation that Baby Curly gives is that he's always wanted to make Timmy happy. And after a bit more encouragement, Tim hears his dad downstairs saying that he's going to go return some books to the library, and he asks Tim to come join him. And Tim decides that after speaking to a weird psychic little bear in his room, getting some fresh air and getting out of the house might be a good idea. So he joins his dad and heads to the library. So we go to the library, checks out some books, and this part doesn't really matter, but it did make me pause because it says that he's going through the young adult section, he's looking for a science fiction writer he likes, and then he picks up a new Bone Chillers paperback he found in the horror section. We're going to talk about this at the end of the summary, because I have a few things to say about that. But what matters is he looks through some of the books, and as he's looking, he sees Jane Wiley, his crush, hanging around one of the book racks checking out the books. Of course, his throat is dry, his palms are sweaty, he doesn't want to go anywhere near her because he's scared, but he remembers what baby Curly told him. Reward follows effort. So he decides to grit his teeth, and he approaches her. So he walks over towards her, and then he hears a loud bleeping sound, and he freaks out, and he twists around to see what it is, and he ends up knocking into the rack and spilling books everywhere. Now, it turns out that that bleeping sound was actually a toy gun that Jane's little brother, called Ralphie, has brought into the library. She scolds him for shooting someone with his gun, and she tries to help Tim in picking up all of these books. And as she does this, she mentions that there's a school dance happening in the school, and because Ross asked her, she'll be going with him, but she wants to know if Tim's going to go as well. So of course Tim's saying, oh yeah, of course, I'll definitely be there. And that makes Jane smile, but then she has to run off because her brother Ralphie is causing some other havoc in the library, so she runs off. But Tim's pretty excited. He's going to a dance, and she seems excited that he'll be there. Sure, she's going with Ross, but she wants Tim to be there. That means something. But after they leave the library and Tim is in the car on the way home, what he realizes is what this means is that he's about to make a fool of himself. He doesn't know how to dance, he hasn't got a date to this thing, and he even has a picture in his head that he'll try to get some soda, it'll spill on him, and then everyone will say, oh look, little Timmy peed his pants, and they'll laugh at him. Even if Jane wants him to be there, what good is it if he's going to make a fool of himself? So when he heads to his room, he actually says this to baby Curly. He says, oh, I don't know what to do. You said that you could make it my girlfriend, but I don't see how that's possible with all this stuff. Like, there's a big dance. I can't even dance. And baby Curly says, that's all right. You can impress Jane. You can dance. He says, how can I don't even know how. And baby Curly says, it's okay. I'll teach you. Quick side note here. So there's more than one form that a living toy can take. If you look online, especially on TV Tropes, a really useful resource for writers, it talks about the sliding scale of living toys. So it can go anywhere from something that's sentient but incapable of moving to something that moves so well that people actually think it's a living thing. It's basically like a person who just has a weird backstory of once being a toy. In this book, baby Curly is somewhere between the Schrodinger's living toy and sentient but inanimate. So even when he's talking, his lips aren't moving. He's just sort of sending thoughts into Tim's head. So when Curly is teaching Tim how to dance, he's basically just sitting in the corner and offering advice and tips and encouragement when he's doing well. And I do think it's cute. This does give that vibe I was talking about before, like this is inverting the horror to family film trope, because the whole, oh, I'll teach you how to dance thing is a common trope in rom-coms and even some kids' movies. So introducing that element does not only add a bit of fun, but it also lets you guard down for when the horror happens later. But even I have to admit that the fact that one of the plot points in this book is that the evil teddy bear teaches the main character to dance, that does lean very heavily on the silly, and I'd like to talk about that at the end of this summary, because I have a lot of thoughts on that. The only other thing I want to add, because it's not relevant to the summary, I just thought it was weird, is that the song that our kid dances to that he's really confident with is a song called Yo Mama Smells, to which the lyrics are, and I'm going to quote this in the most formal accent I can because I think it's funny. Yo mama smells. Her smell could ring bells. Poison all the wells. So bad everybody yells, Yo mama smells. Woo. Now, I am pretty sure, like I am 95% sure that this is just a satire of R&B songs. Maybe Gene Holt's not a fan, I don't know. But it does tip the sillyometer closer to goofy than fun, in my opinion. But you know what, I think we need to move on because I'm dwelling way too long on this. So, we go to our next chapter, where it is the actual dance, the fall fantasy dance for the 6th grade kids. So Tim goes to the dance, and it makes note that he avoids the drinks table because he has that flashback of the memory of him spilling it and saying he peed his pants. So he avoids that entirely, but instead he sees Jane and Ross are actually doing some dancing to a slow dance. And yeah, he's jealous and he's nervous, but no, he knows how to dance now. So when the music shifts to something more boppin', in fact, it starts playing Yo Mama Smells, and hey, he knows exactly how to dance to that. So he gets into the dance floor and he just starts cutting it up, and he's looking around and he sees that these other kids are moving out of rhythm. They're not moving very fluently. And so not only is he dancing really well, but after a while he's closing his eyes, getting into the song, and he opens them and realizes that there's a circle of kids around him, sort of like, go Timmy, because genuinely, he's dancing that well that people are cheering him on. He even does, I think it says here, he does a backflip at one point. He's incredible. When he steps off the dance floor, he's approached by Jane, who tells him that he is amazing. She wants to know where he learned to dance, and he just sort of shrugs it off, saying he learned from a friend. And Jane is saying that she really liked it. She was very impressed. And then Ross shoulders in to say, hey, this is a dance for geeks and losers. Let's get out of here. And she's not keen, but he basically grabs her arm and pulls her out, so they head out the door. And our guy Tim watches as they head out the door. And after they leave, Ross then comes back into the door, stares him right in the eye, and mouths, "Stay away." So it seems Ross, clearly, is the jealous type. When Tim gets home, he doesn't really know how to feel, because on the one hand he impressed Jane, but also all this stuff is pointless because she's with Ross, and he can't stand up to Ross, and he definitely can't take Jane from him if they're boyfriend, girlfriend. But when he goes and talks to Baby Curly about it, Baby Curly says, "I didn't bring you this far to be stopped by some goon." And then Baby Curly suggests, "You need to get rid of Ross." Obviously Tim doesn't know what he means by that, so when he asks for clarification, Baby Curly suggests that he fix the brakes on his bicycle to make his old friend have a little accident. Tim says this is a terrible idea, and so he ends up leaving his room because not only is he not keen on the idea, he's actually now a little scared of Baby Curly. The next day at school, he's kind of popular. Some kids walk up to him, and when they say, "Oh man, you were an amazing dancer, Timmy," he says, "Oh no, my name's Tim." They start saying, "Oh yeah, you were rockin', Tim." So he's actually getting popular, people like him. And when Jane sees him, she even calls him over saying hi. And so of course he wants to go talk to her, even though Ross is standing there. But as soon as Ross sees Tim, he just starts making fun of him, saying, "Oh man, what was it? Last night you were dancing like a girl. Ooh la la, where's your tutu?" And because Tim already struggles with self-confidence, he just doesn't know how to respond to that, except saying, "Look, shut up, alright?" But as he walks away, with Ross and some of the other kids laughing at him, he swears he can hear Jane laughing at him as well. Which leads us into the next chapter. All day long, other kids were nice to Tim, but he barely heard them. He felt so miserable, he couldn't even look anyone in the eye. By the time he got home, he just wanted to curl up in bed and hide from the world. The day had started off so well, and then Ross had to go and ruin it completely. Why did Ross have to humiliate him so badly in front of Jane? Why did he have to be so horrible? Tim went up to his room, got Baby Curly down from the high shelf, and hugged the teddy bear. The sound of static filled Tim's mind, louder than ever.
"Because Ross is a stupid jerk."
The stuffed animal answered Tim's unspoken questions.
"Because he's jealous, and because he needs to be put down, like a rabid dog."
Tim placed the teddy bear on the bed. "I can't hurt Ross," he said. I want to. I want him to stop being so mean to me, but I just can't. It's totally wrong."
"Is it wrong to slap a bee that stings you?"
Baby Curly asked. After thinking about that for a moment, Tim shook his head. "No, not really," he replied. "But this is different. Ross isn't a bee. He's a person. It's totally different."
"It's not different,"
Baby Curly argued in his piping voice.
"If something or someone stings you, you slap it. You smack it dead. Fix Ross's brakes. It's the only solution."
Tim stood up and began to pace alongside the bed. Then he stopped and stared down at the teddy bear. He sighed. "No," he said. "It's totally wrong. You're totally wrong."
"Have I been wrong so far?"
the stuffed animal asked mildly. "No, but..."
"Aren't you popular now?"
"Yes, but this is different."
"Have you ever gotten so close to Jane on your own?"
Tim shook his head. "No, but she's with Ross."
"And he's all that stands in your way,"
Baby Curly interrupted pleasantly.
"Trust me, all I've ever wanted is to make you happy.
You're confusing me, Tim protested. Stop it. I know what's right.
Do you?
Baby Curly asked calmly.
Look deep into my eyes. There, you'll see the truth.
Staring into the teddy bear's eyes made Tim feel warm and drowsy. He felt suddenly relaxed, his arms dangling at his sides, as Baby Curly's cracked eye began to pulse with a red glow.
Listen to me,
the teddy bear whispered in a soothing voice.
I know what's best. Ross must be stopped. Say you'll do what I tell you to do. Say you'll fix his brakes.
Tim struggled against the whispered words, but he felt dreamy, as though he were floating on his back in a warm pool of water. It felt very nice. He could barely remember what he had been arguing about.
Fix Ross's brakes,
Baby Curly whispered.
It's the only solution.
Again, a tiny part of Tim's mind fought against the teddy bear's idea, but suddenly, faintly, the sound of Ross and Rosalind and Jane laughing at him filled his brain. Yes, Tim thought. Ross must be stopped, and Baby Curly knew how. Maybe, he said aloud, maybe that's not such a bad idea.
Good boy,
the teddy bear told Tim.
That's a good boy.
Wonderful, peaceful feelings washed over Tim as he swayed where he stood and listened to the stuffed animal's soothing words.
All I've ever wanted is to make you happy,
Baby Curly repeated softly.
Here's what you'll do.
Holy crap, Baby Curly is a Sith Lord. I don't know about you, but I think that is creepy as all hell. And it actually seems to be working, because in the next chapter, Tim actually sneaks out of his house and heads to Ross's house. He knows where he lived because he used to be his friend. And now that he's his enemy, he also knows how to sneak around. He's even brought some sausages that he feeds to Ross's dog to make sure that he doesn't bark or get any attention to him. And he sneaks into the garage where he knows they leave the side door unlocked, and he heads towards his bike. He heads to the bike, and just like he was told, he loosens the nut on the brake wire. He stands up and looks around, and as he does, he sees Ross standing right there in the doorway. But thankfully, Ross is actually turned the other direction. He's calling back to his parents saying, I am taking the garbage out. So Tim has just enough time. He dives down and he crawls himself under the family car. So Ross comes out, takes out the garbage, pets the dog, heads in. But this is enough that when Tim crawls out from under the car and feels his heart beating in his chest, he thinks, what the hell am I doing? And he comes to his senses saying, no, this is crazy. I shouldn't be doing this. So he reaches down and he quickly tightens the brake wire on the bike once again, and then he heads home. He gets the hell out of there. In the next chapter, we learn that Tim has been giving Baby Curly a wide berth. He isn't even sleeping in his bedroom. He slept on the couch last night to make sure that he couldn't be within Baby Curly's influence. But when Tim's about to ride home from school on his bike, Ross shows up on his bike and starts making fun of him, saying he dances like a girl and saying, hey, what are you doing on a boy's bike? Shouldn't you have a girl's bike? Because, 90s and sexism was an insult back then. And so Ross challenges him, saying, hey, I bet you I can make it to your driveway faster than you can. So, of course, our guy says, you're on. So he gets one of his friends to do the countdown. So he says, okay, 3, 2, and then Ross takes off early because he's a cheating mongrel. And so when he says 1, Tim then follows him after. And even though Ross has a head start, Tim can race past him, so he really pedals even faster. He actually gets ahead of Ross and he wins the race. So he gets to his driveway and he slams on the brakes and he turns to Ross. But Ross isn't putting on his brakes. They're just not working for some reason. Instead, his bike goes careening towards a car which has just started pulling out of a driveway, and he crashes into the car. And the book describes how there's a sickening crack that Tim can hear, and when he's then lying on the ground, he sees that Ross's leg is bent at an awful angle. And then, just to add trauma to injury, the family of the car gets out and he sees that it's Jane, and she is freaking out. She starts screaming, saying, oh no, he's dead, you killed him. And thankfully he's not dead. This book isn't going that far. But the parents get out of the car and see that he's broken his leg and he's in terrible pain, and so they need to get him to the hospital straight away. So they all get back into the car, with Ross trying not to hurt his leg and Jane crying the whole time. The only one who doesn't seem to be upset by this is little Ralphie, who shoots his toy gun at Tim once again before the car goes driving off. So now furious, Tim heads home, goes straight to his room and confronts Baby Curly, asking him what on earth he was doing. He hypnotized him somehow. He made him do that stuff. What did he do all that stuff for? And Baby Curly says to him that he wants to offer congratulations. He says, no, it was all a test. Because if you're willing to hurt someone else, then you're not ready for love and maturity. And so the fact that you went to break his bike, but then you turned back and fixed it afterwards, that's a sign that you are ready for the next step. But Tim explains, it didn't work. It was still broken. You must have done something. But baby Curly says, oh, no, I couldn't do that. I'm just a teddy bear. No, when you fixed it, you must have just fixed it wrong. It was an accident, nothing more. Now, Tim doesn't know whether or not to trust baby Curly anymore, but he's given him some really good advice so far, so he says, look, I feel so guilty. I know I tried to fix it, but I still feel responsible if I didn't fix it properly. What am I going to do? And baby Curly says that the best thing to do would be to confess, to tell Jane and Ross that he was responsible, and he tried to fix it, but he was ultimately responsible. That's the mature thing to do, and that's what will make Jane forgive him, and forgiveness is just a short step away from love. And I actually like the fact that Tim does not believe baby Curly. He does think that he's maybe trying to help, but at the same time, confessing that he might have been responsible for his friend getting injured, for the trauma she went through. No, there's no way that he's going to tell Jane about that. But it doesn't matter. Even though Tim doesn't fall for it, when he's at school the next day, he's eating in the cafeteria, when Jane comes storming towards him, she throws a note in front of him and asks him what is the meaning of this. Tim reads it, and it's an apology note in his handwriting with his signature explaining that he was responsible for the breaks and he tried to fix them, but he's responsible and he's sorry. He doesn't know what's going on because he didn't write it. That is his signature, and he can't really explain it. And this is when Jane goes off and says, I can't believe I even trusted you. I can't believe I liked you. I even had a little crush on you, but now I can't even look at you after what you did to Ross. I haven't even decided if I'm going to tell on you or not, but I'm just grossed out. You're a horrible person. And then she storms off, and Tim is left speechless. I mean, what can he say? That's the worst possible thing that could have ever happened. That afternoon, he heads home and he goes straight to baby Curly again because he needs more advice. He doesn't know what to do, and he tries to explain, someone must have passed her a note or something, but baby Curly says, don't worry, I already know all about it. And I'm glad. Good riddance, I say. Tim doesn't know what he's talking about, but baby Curly explains that she's made him more unhappy than anyone else. He's been suffering because of all this, so baby Curly made sure that she was out of his life. But that was just the first step. He's got a plan to get rid of her forever, so she'll never make him unhappy again. He says that tomorrow, Tim should go to school and poison her. Put poison in her Diet Coke that she has. Perfect. Get rid of her for the rest of his life. Tim lashes out and kicks the teddy bear, but he just doesn't listen. He says, no, you have to listen to me. You have to poison Jane. So, now sick of all these lies and manipulation, Timmy picks up the bear and he heads towards the bin. And it's kind of creepy how baby Curly starts crying out, saying, no, please don't. You have to listen. You have to do what I'm telling you to do. But he ignores him. He just goes downstairs and throws him straight in the bin. So Tim heads up to his room again. But you know this song and dance, don't you? Because there's more than 20 pages left in this book. So when Tim gets back to his bedroom, he sees baby Curly sitting on the edge of his bed.
What?
Tim stuttered. How?
Did you think you could get rid of me so easily?
The teddy bear asked smugly.
Forget it, mister. If you won't fix Jane, I'll do it myself.
Tim crossed his arms over his chest. How? He asked. You can't do anything. You're just a teddy bear.
Oh, yeah?
Baby Curly asked.
Well, I can do this.
As Tim watched in horror, the stuffed animal's cracked eye began to glow red, and then his head started slowly turning. This cannot be happening, Tim thought wildly. I refuse to believe this is happening. Baby Curly's head slowly spun completely around twice, and then stopped facing the models on Tim's windowsill.
Watch,
Baby Curly said. Tim stared in shock as the glow from the teddy bear's eye grew brighter and brighter. Then, on the windowsill, Tim's model of Darth Vader started to melt. Darth's helmet smushed down, and then the whole model just slumped to the side, finally ending up in a puddle of black goo. Stop, Tim said weakly. Baby Curly's eye glowed again. This time the model of Frankenstein's monster began to collapse, its outstretched arms bending toward the floor. Stop! Tim insisted more loudly. He stormed over and stood in front of Baby Curly. Stop or I'll rip you to shreds! Baby Curly laughed, a horrible, shrill laugh, and grotesquely his mouth moved as his laugh filled the room. Tim stepped back, away from the evil stuffed animal on the bed.
You think you're safe?
Baby Curly asked.
You've disappointed me too many times, Timmy. You're not safe at all.
The teddy bear focused his cracked eye on Tim. It pulsed with harsh red light. Tim suddenly itched all over, then shooting hot pain streaked up and down his arms and legs. Tim began to hop up and down uncontrollably as nasty red welts sprang up on his arms and hands. He could feel his face burning. He dropped to the floor, scratching desperately at his painfully burning limbs. Baby Curly laughed again, throwing his floppy head back. Tim couldn't take it anymore. "Stop!" he gasped in pain. "Please, make it stop!" Suddenly, the terrible burning itchiness ceased. Tim struggled to take deep breaths. He pulled himself up to his knees.
Now it's Jane's turn,
Baby Curly said flatly.
but for her, I won't stop.
"No," Tim cried weakly. He tried to drag himself toward the bed. "I won't let you."
Too late,
Baby Curly said.
Jane's dead.
With those words, the stuffed animal smiled, and then he vanished in a puff of smelly yellow smoke. "No!" Tim screamed, but he was all alone in the room. I wanted you to hear that whole chapter because I love the way this ramps things up. We now know things are serious, and it's like the second last chapter here, so things are ramping up for the big finish. So now Tim knows that Jane is in mortal danger, so he leaves, he heads straight to her house. And when he gets to her place, he's knocking on the door, and he says to her that she's in danger, but she still hates him. She doesn't know what he's doing there. She refuses this. She doesn't want to even let him in the house, but he forces his way in, and I think they only just manage to make it so he doesn't actually hurt her. He just sort of surprises her by bursting through the door, and then he starts running upstairs. He checks on her little brother, he checks the room, and she basically is saying, "Look, get the heck out of my house, or I'm going to call my parents, call the police, something. You shouldn't be here." And there's a brief moment before the chapter ends with a bit of a fake out, like, is there no teddy bear? Was this just another trick? But when Jane steps into the room, the door closes behind her to reveal Baby Curly.
How sweet,
The teddy bear said out loud.
Tim's going to save Jane. Well, I don't think so. I think you're both in big, big trouble.
Jane took one look at the stuffed animal grinning menacingly in front of her bedroom door and screamed.
Are you ready to die?
Baby Curly asked Jane cheerfully. "What is that?" Jane shouted at Tim. "What's that thing doing in my bedroom?" "I told you," Tim replied. "That's Baby Curly, my teddy bear."
That's right, honey.
Baby Curly told Jane.
Prepare to die.
Then the teddy bear began to walk slowly toward Jane on his stumpy little legs. Jane screamed again and ducked behind Tim. "Get it away from me!" she yelled. Tim headed toward the stuffed animal, preparing to kick it as hard as he could. Before he could take 2 steps, Baby Curly's eye glowed red, and Tim was racked with more pain than he'd ever felt before in his life. "Ah!" he shouted. "Ow! Ah!" But Tim had to save Jane. He took another step toward Baby Curly, fighting the pain. Baby Curly raised one eyebrow.
Very impressive,
he said mockingly, and then his cracked eye glowed brighter. Tim fell to the ground. He couldn't stand it. His arms, legs, and face felt as if they were being stung over and over by furious wasps. He squirmed on the ground, wishing only that the pain would end. When Tim crumples to the ground, racked with pain, he then sees as Baby Curly turns towards Jane and starts putting his heat vision on her, and she starts screaming in pain. When suddenly the bedroom door opens, and Ralphie's standing there. He wants to know what's going on. He's crying. He wants to know why Janie's screaming. And this gives Tim an idea. He takes the toy gun off Ralphie and points it at Baby Curly. And when the bear sees the gun in his hands, he looks scared. He starts backing away, saying, "Put it down. Put the gun down, Timmy." And Tim gets his sort of action hero line saying, "My name is Tim, and I'm done playing with you." Then he pulls the trigger. Bleep. A plastic ball shot out of the gun and hit Baby Curly right in the middle of the forehead. The ball disappeared into Baby Curly's stuffed head. For a moment, the room was engulfed in total silence.
Goodbye, Timmy.
Baby Curly's little voice said softly in Tim's mind.
All I ever wanted was to make you happy.
Then, with an incredibly loud boom, the stuffed animal's head exploded. Now, that is how you end a horror story. But, of course, there's a little bit more after that, because they have the stuffing and the bits of bear are falling down, and Tim turns to Jane to make sure she's okay, and yeah, she's still got some burns, but she's going to be all right. And he says he's so sorry for all this, he's sorry that everything happened, and she explains, "Hey, look, it's okay, I now understand that you were going through something. I'm just glad you saved my life." And then Tim admits that, well, he kind of had to, because he wanted to save her. He felt responsible, and, really, really likes her. In fact, he has a crush on her. And she is surprised to hear that. And she says that, well, she had a crush on him. And in fact, hey, if he saved her life, maybe they could be good friends. Of course, our kid Tim says, hey, what about Ross? And she says, even in the hospital, he was treating all the doctors and nurses like garbage. I am sick of hanging out with bad people. But you, Tim, you seem like a sweet guy. And she gives him a kiss on the cheek. The end. Okay, so with this book, Scare Bear, I have to say, the reason why I think I liked this as much as I did is because I was expecting some tropes that I knew a lot about, the evil forget-me-not, and maybe some creepy toy stuff, some corrupted innocence. But the reason why I liked it so much is because it seemed to be leaning a lot more into this idea of not so much evil toy, but a deal with the devil. Because even though this is a teddy bear and it's evil for whatever reason, it's offering him something he wants, but in order to get there, he needs to do something he doesn't want, which is to say, to love this toy more, or to instead get rid of the people in his life that he loves. And I gotta say, when it comes to horror, a deal with the devil story about slowly being corrupted by this evil influence, I think you've got a fantastic story right there. Because first of all, every story about it will be different because it depends on what the characters want. But that's the main thing, right? It's all about what they want. And that is a fundamental aspect of one form of story writing. Now, some of this comes from literary and film analysis. But the idea is that a lot of stories are about the main character having to balance two facets of self, which is their want and their need. So their want is something that they desire emotionally, that they really want to have their hands on. But the thing is that their need is much more complex or requires a lot more thinking. And in fact, the journey to get from want to recognizing that they should seek not their want but their need is what defines a whole lot of different story structures. So for instance, in this story, what our kid wants is he wants to be popular and to get the girl, but what he needs is to like himself. So many times in this story, our kid is embarrassed because someone made fun of him, all this stuff, but if you're paying attention, you'll notice that a lot of it is just in his head. He spends a lot of his afternoons doing models instead of going out and trying to find friends. He doesn't get picked for the team because he doesn't know people, and the teams are being picked by his enemy and a girl who doesn't know him. When people are making fun of him in the hall, he assumes that everyone's laughing at him, even his girlfriend, when it's really just Ross. Everyone at school is saying that he's awesome, and yet he's focusing on the one person that says you suck. And that's what defines a lot of this story, is that he wants this, but he needs to accept himself, but he can't do that, and so instead, he's turning even to this little evil teddy bear for help, because it offers him what he wants most. But while I do like all of that stuff, I gotta say, I think that this book does have some flaws. We'll start with the small stuff. The first one is that scene in the library where a kid's looking for books and he picks up a Bone Chillers book. Now, I want to start by saying that I do not like this. However, that is a personal preference. See, I don't like playing with metafiction and stuff like that because when it comes to canonicity, I struggle to understand it, and I think that it puts the idea of, the series in doubt. But the thing is, it's not a bad tool, especially for a story like this, for a kid's book, because what this is doing mechanically is it's showing the reader, hey, you're a kid who went and picked up a Bone Chillers book, and in this story, the main character is a kid who picked up a Bone Chillers book, so hey, the kinds of things that happen to him could happen to you. It's sort of providing a touch of immersion. I personally don't like doing that because I tend to be quite hyperliteral when it comes to the ways that I construct my stories, and so I struggle to understand the canon of a book that does that, especially in a series. But that is a personal preference, and I'd even say a personal bias. So if you think it would work for your own stories, you can try it, but it did make me question this book. So be aware that readers like me will find it slightly off-putting, especially because of the sillier scenes that happen around the midpoint of the book. Now, I said I'd talk about this, but you might think it's a little odd that I'm criticizing this book for being silly and goofy, when I have said before, in fact, I even said in the last episode of this podcast, that you shouldn't be afraid of a silly idea, that you should develop it and work with it. But the trick is that it's all about tone. It's all about finding the right way to express that idea, because the idea of a kid learning to dance is not, in and of itself, a bad idea. But then the song Yo Mama Smells is so dumb that it takes me out of the moment. And it's not that I don't find it funny. My issue is that this scene is happening just before the dance, when our kid needs to dance to try to impress a girl. This is meant to be building tension. You can relieve a bit of tension if it's going too high, but this is meant to be a scene where we're building tension. The kid is gaining that ability. Oh, could he do it? And so adding in that relief of tension with a joke or something silly like this doesn't make sense for this book. At least not in this scene. Like, oh, you know what? Perfect example. In this book, how do we defeat the teddy bear? He gets shot with a toy gun. Now, yes, that's a silly idea, but I personally think that works because we established the gun throughout the story earlier. There's a lot of foreshadowing sort of leading up to the scene, and it makes sense to me that because the teddy bear is a toy and the gun is a toy, it makes sense to me that he is vulnerable to being shot with a toy gun. That makes sense to me. That makes emotional sense to me at the very least. And you know that scene. I read it to you. So him saying, "I'm sorry, Timmy, I just wanted to make you happy," and then exploding, like, to me, that is how you do a silly idea, but you take it seriously and you make it fit within the story and within the tone. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, my hyperliteral brain doesn't like that the toy gun and also the teddy seems to work and come to life. Like, I don't understand how that works. I'd really want to... But, you know, again, that's me getting lost in my own biases. I like to understand this stuff inside and out. But it kind of works for this story. I will admit some of that did take the score down because, to me, yeah, the toy is alive, but also it can speak to minds, but also the toy works, but then also he has heat vision powers. Like, to me, that stretches credulity to the point where I'm like, okay, someone needs to explain how this magic works, even just a little bit, even offhandedly, right? But for the most part, it works. But you know what? Speaking of that death scene, I actually had an idea when I was recording it for this that I didn't have after I read the book, and I have to share it because I think it's an interesting concept. At the very end, he says, "I only wanted to make you happy." And then what happens? The bear explodes, and then Jane forgives him, and they get together. So, consider, is there a possibility that this was Baby Curly's plan all along? If he's going to be thrown in the trash, he might as well go out with a bang, quite literally in this case. And hey, if he becomes the villain, maybe that could bring Jane and our kid together. You know, a little bit of post-traumatic coupling. I'm not saying it's canon, I'm just saying that it's a possibility. But all that being said, putting all the pieces together, I think that this book is a B. I like the structure, I like the character stuff. It gets pulled back because I didn't like some of the goofy elements. I didn't like that they didn't quite explain how the resolution worked. It did feel a little bit Deus Ex Machina. Even with a bit of foreshadowing, I don't think that was enough to explain why this is what saves the day. But I can't deny that I had fun, and so this book is definitely a B. And I swear it's not just because it's B for bear. I put a lot of thought in this. I was even thinking about changing it, so I did make that pun, but no, it's true. I think it is actually a B, so we're sticking with it. So what can we learn from this book? Well, to me, the first one is obvious. Tweak your tropes. I was not looking forward to reading this book. I mean, it was called Scare Bear, it had an evil toy. I thought it was just going to be another evil toy story that I've read 2 or 3 times before. I mean, not as many as I thought, but I thought that I already knew what was going to happen in this story. And then they threw a spanner in the works with just that little deal with the devil aspect. That little manipulative, whispering in the ear, the worm tongue. That was enough to reinvigorate this in my eyes. I really enjoyed this book because I didn't 100% know what was coming, even though I had some idea. And I think that's important for a lot of writers, especially young writers, because there is a psychological phenomenon that I call the originality complex. Which is to say, people don't like ideas that they didn't come up with first. They feel like it's not as worthy, or they don't feel like they've earned it. And especially if you start reading that website that I promoted earlier, TV Tropes, a lot of writers will think, oh hey, have they done this before? And then they'll find a trope that is that exact thing. And say, oh okay, well I bet they haven't tried it with this twist, and then they'll see that there's a trope with that exact thing. And so writers start thinking, oh well, there's nothing new under the sun, what's the point of it all? Why should I even write if I can't come up with anything new? And hey, maybe that's true, maybe there is nothing new under the sun. But that doesn't mean that you can't cut things up and then bring them back into the light for people. Especially with books like this, middle grade. Remember, a lot of kids haven't seen these tropes before. This could be the first time that a kid's read an evil toy story. I still think you should tweak your tropes because it means that your story will be that little different from the next story that they read that's about an evil toy, but don't be afraid to do something that seems unoriginal, but make it your own. But do you know the second thing that I got out of this book? And unfortunately, I don't think most of you would know because I didn't include them in some of the excerpts I read. I try to stick to things that are most relevant to the plot, but the thing that really stood out for me in this book is the background characters. I mean, I mentioned early in the book that the mum has a personality. She's sort of joking with the kid. The dad also has a bit of that. And then later she's talking to her sister on the phone. But also when they're at the school, the kids act like they would at school. You know, yes, there is the stupid scene where Ross makes fun of him and all the kids laughed, ha. But the kids approaching him after school when he's doing the dance, they're being pretty supportive because, I mean, this kid can dance. He did a friggin' backflip in the middle of the dance floor. That's impressive. So it makes sense to me that they're all praising him for what he's done, but they're all still calling him Timmy because they don't know his name yet because they don't know him that well. And, I mean, with the car crash later, then when Ross gets hit, the dad who gets out of the car is checking to see if he's okay. And when his daughter's crying, he's very quick to say, no, he's not dead. He's okay. We just need to get him to a hospital. Like, he feels realistic. Heck, even the dog, even Rudy, he feeds him the sausage early on. And I didn't even mention it, but when he goes to fix the bike after tampering with it, the dog comes up and licks his face, which makes sense because he just fed it you know what I mean? Like, all this stuff just feels so real. It makes this world feel real. And so that's what I want to say, the importance of your background characters. You don't need to reinvent the wheel here, but just give them a little bit of humanity, make them feel real, and it makes the story that much more engaging. Because of course, having the main character, understanding their quirks and interests, that of course is necessary for a good story. But for a great story, they need to live in a world that's not just made of cardboard. So, that was Bone Chiller's number 20, Scare Bear. And if my understanding of the next book is correct, if the cover page is accurate at least, the next book in this series is actually written by Betsy Haynes herself. The last book, not the last book in this series, just the last one written by the author who started it all to begin with. I just hope it's at least as good as Slime Time. But hey, if you thought this was scary, just wait to see what I've got in store for you next time.